Hey guys, it's Ms. Moylan. Today in the computer lab, we are going to be setting up our fraction, decimal, and percent book. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to put your name on your book where it says name, first and last. If you could squeeze in what period you have me, and that way if they get lost, I can easily sort them. Then we're going to fill in some definitions on this first page. So a fraction is part of a whole. It can be out of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It keeps on going forever. It can be out of any total. So pause the video and make sure you write that down. A decimal is also part of a whole, and it can be out of tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s. As long as it's a power of 10, it can be out of it for a decimal. So think of a place value chart. And a percent is also part of a whole, but they are pretty special because they can only be out of 100. So decimals are always out of 100. Make sure you've got all that information before turning the page. The first one we're going to do is the fraction 1/2. Some of you probably already know that it's equal to 0.5 and 50%. But if you don't know that, we need to figure out how we get there. So remember on the front, we said that a decimal is out of a 10 or 100 or 1,000. So if we made an equivalent fraction out of 10, we would say, okay, I would have to multiply times 5 and times 5, so I'd get 5/10. Well, this is how you write 5/10. And then 50% is 50 out of 100. So again, if I made that equivalent fraction out of 100, then I would say that I would have to do times 50 times 50 to get 50 out of 100. So that's where 50% comes from. If you have 2 halves, you can think of it the same way. 2 halves is a fraction. If I made it an equivalent fraction out of a different denominator of 10, I would say that I would have to multiply times 5 again, and I get 10 out of 10, which we know equals 1. And then that would also be equal to 100%. Think about a test. If there was only 2 questions and you got them both right, you would have 100% on that. So in your books, you should have everything written that you see on the screen. Pause it if you need to. When we get to 1/3, it's not as easy as 1/2 though. Remember when we watched a video a couple weeks ago and we talked about that fraction bar actually means division? Well, that's how we can change this fraction into a decimal. The numerator always goes in the box, whether it's bigger or smaller. The numerator always goes in the box, and then we can divide. But when we look at this, we say, well, 3 won't go into 1. So I could put my 0 here, but I know that I have to add a decimal and a 0 and continue with my division. So 3, then I bring my decimal straight up, and 3 would then go into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Subtract, I can bring down another 0. 3 into 10 again is 3. You can probably notice that this is just going to keep repeating and repeating and repeating. That's a fraction that's called a repeat, or a decimal that's called a repeating decimal. So you put a bar over the numbers that repeat to show that it keeps on going and going and going. To then change that into a percentage, it's really easy. There's almost no math to do. You just have to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So the decimal equivalent to 1/3 would be 33.3%. So again, here's our decimal, 333 thousandths, and here's our percentage, 33.3%. For 2/3, you would do the same math, so you would do 2 divided by 3. Pause the video and see how you do. Then come back and check. So what you should have done was 3 into 2 was 0 times. Add your decimal and 0 and bring your decimal straight up. 3 into 20 is 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18. 2, you can add another 0 and bring down. And again, this is going to be a repeating decimal. So you could say 666 thousandths, and our percentage would be 66.6%. For 3/3, it would be the same as 2 over 2 or 4 over 4. It's always going to be equal to 1 whole and 100%. So that's an easy one to fill in. Then we move down to the fourths. The fourths are just as easy as the halves because 4 will go into one of those decimal place values of 100. So I could make an equivalent fraction, 1/4, and I would say that I'd have to multiply times 25. So I'd get 25 out of 100, which is 25 hundredths. Then I move my decimal 2 places to the right, and I get 25%. For 2/4, we know that 2/4 equals 1/2. And you can look right above and see that 1/2 was equal to 0.5 or 0.50. It means the same thing, and equal to 50%. Then we've got 3/4. We can do the same as we did for 1/4 and say 3/4 equals how many 100ths, and you'd have to multiply times 25. Times 25, and you'd get 75, so 0.75 and 75%. And then 4/4 would again be 1, and you could write that 100% in there too. Fifths is just as easy because 5, the denominator, will go into a decimal place, which is 100. So we can take our 1/5 and say, what would I have to multiply by? I'd have to multiply by 20. So I'd get 20 100ths, which is written 0.20, and then that's 20%. 2/5, same thing. 2/5 equals how many 100ths? I could multiply by 20 again because 5 goes into 100 20 times and get 40 100ths, so 0.40 and 40%. 3/5, again multiplying it times 20 to get 0.60 and 60%. 4/5 times 20 again. It's kind of like if you took a test that only had 5 questions on it, each question would be worth 20 points. So 0.80 and 80%. And then 5/5, just like all of the other whole numbers, is written 1.0 or 100%. So the halves, fourths, and fifths are pretty easy. The thirds weren't so bad because they were repeating decimals. The sixths get a little bit trickier. When you get to the sixth, we know how to do that, so we'll practice that. The numerator always goes in the box. 6 will only go into 1 0 times, so we'll have to add our decimal and our 0. And then we could say, well, 6 goes into 10 once, giving us 4 left over, and add a 0, bring it down. 6 goes into 40 6 times, so 6 times 6 is 36, with 4 left over again. And so then hopefully you can see that this is also going to be a repeating decimal. So as a decimal, we would write 0.166, and then the bar would be over the 2 6's, but not the 1, because the 1 doesn't repeat. Then to get our percentage, we move our decimal 2 places to the right, so we would say 16.6%. Pause the video and see if you can figure out the other 6's real quick, and then come back to check. So hopefully you paused it and you're coming back to check right now. So now we look at the 2 6. We know that 2 6 will simplify if we divide by 2. That would simplify to 1/3. And we know what 1/3 is because we already did that. So we know that 2 6 equals 0.333 with a bar because it's repeating, and it's 33.3%. 3 6 we know actually equals 1/2, which we know equals 0.5 or 0.50 and 50%. 4/6 will simplify to 2/3, and we've already done that one earlier, so that would be 0.66 and 6 with a bar over the 3 sixes because they repeat, and 66.6%. 5/6, you would have to do the division for it, and you would find that you would get 0.833 with the bar over the 2 threes because those are the ones that repeat, and then you'd get 83%. And then 6/6, since it's a whole number, we would have 1.0 and 100%. So the sixes take a little bit more time than maybe the fourths or the fifths. The sevenths are pretty tricky. So we're actually going to come back to the sevenths. Go ahead and flip over to the eighths. When you get to the eighths, these are fractions that we're going to see all the time. And we know that our 2/8 and our 4/8 are going to simplify. So let's really just figure out 1/8, 3/8, and 5/8. So 1/8, we would put the 1 in the box because the numerator always goes in the box and the 8 goes out. 8 won't go into 1, so we put our 0, and then we add a decimal and a 0, and then we can divide. 8 goes into 10 once. With 2 left over, we bring another 0 down. 8 goes into 20 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16. And we get 4. Bring another 0 down. And 8 goes into 40 5 times. And now there's nothing left over, so we are done with our division. So this is not a repeating decimal. It is just 125 thousandths. As a percent, we would say 12.5% because we'd move our decimal 2 places to the right. 2/8, we know that will simplify to 1/4, which we know is 0.25 or 25%. But 3/8, we can't simplify that, so we'll have to do the division. The numerator goes in the box. 8 goes into 3 0 times, so we have to add our decimal and 0. Bring your decimal straight up to the answer. 8 goes into 30. That's what you've got to figure out. 8 goes into 33 times. 3 times 8 is 24. Subtract and bring down. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract and bring down. And then 8 goes into 40 5 times. So there's your decimal, and your percentage would be 37.5%. 4/8 we know simplifies to 1/2, so that would be equal to 0.5 or 50%. 5/8 does not simplify, so we'll have to divide to figure out its decimal. 5 divided by 8, numerator in the box. 8 goes into 5 0 times, so we have to add a decimal and a 0 and continue. 8 goes into 50 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. 2 and bring down. 8 goes into 20 twice. 16, 4 and bring down. And then 8 goes into 45 times. So 5/8 is equivalent to 625 thousandths or 62.5%. 6/8 we know that would simplify to 3/4, which is equal to 0.75 and 75%. 8/8 down at the bottom we know is equal to 1 whole or 100%. So the only one left to figure out is 7/8. So numerator in the box, denominator out, add a decimal and a 0. 8 goes into 7 0 times. Bring your decimal straight up. 8 goes into 70 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. 70 minus 64 is 6. Add a 0 and bring it down. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract and bring down. And then 8 goes into 40 5 times. So 7/8 is equivalent to 875 thousandths or 87.5%. The ninths are also pretty tricky, and we're actually going to do those in class unless you want to figure them out on your own, which I'm sure you can do. And then we've already got most of them. So 1/10, we don't even have to actually do anything for the decimals because 10 is a place value. So the decimal equivalent to 1/10 is 1/10. So we'd put a 1 in the 10th place, which is equal to 10%. So the tenths are really easy. 2/10 equals 2/10 or 20%. 3/10 equals 3/10 or 30%. 4/10 equals 4/10 or 40%. I think you're picking up the pattern. 5/10 or 50%. 6/10 or 60%. 7/10 or 70%. 8/10 or 80%. 9/10 or 90%. And 10/10 is 1 whole or 100%. Down at the bottom of your paper, you have a star at 11/10. So I'd like for you to try and figure out what you think that would be equal to.